It is cold here in Georgia, and we are actually expecting some snow either tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Well, let me start by saying Merry New Year to all of my students. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Jay, and welcome to another English lesson here on the channel, where I have the opportunity to help you with your English comprehension, vocabulary, and your English fluency. Oh, it is so cold here. I just got back in the house from bringing my neighbor's dog in. You remember the dog I told you about that is blind and deaf? His name is Chester. And so I just went over to my neighbor's house, who is an elderly neighbor, friend of mine, and I brought his dog in for the evening because it is very cold. And now I am back. Our first lesson, or actually I believe our second lesson for the new year. Well, I have a delightful story today about Slinky. Can you figure out who is Slinky in this picture here? We're going to go through today's story. As always, I am going to read at a pace that you can follow, review some of the key vocabulary words, and just have a great time on today's lesson. I have missed you guys, and I'm glad that you're joining me for today's lesson. If this is your first time, be sure to check out the playlist links down in the description, and you can study some of my other lessons here on the channel. And be sure to hang around until the end, where I'll test your comprehension of today's story. Well, I hope you're ready. Let's dive into today's lesson. Marco's pet ball python, Slinky, had been missing in the house for 3 days, and his family was in a state of panic. Okay, Marco had a pet ball python, and notice his name was Slinky. Now, let me tell you, this story was inspired actually by an event that took place when I was in college. A friend of mine at the time, he had a ball python, and this is a true story. I don't like snakes, but it was kind of cool for this, python to go up and down your arm, wrap around you, and just sit there gazing at you. But I'll never forget that his python got loose in the college dormitory, and we believe it went in the vent or the venting system, and we never found the snake again. For all we know, there's a giant snake still alive in the college dormitory. So let's see what happens in today's story, as that event was my inspiration. Okay. Now, notice the family was in a state of panic, So when someone is in a state of panic, sometimes we call them frantic. It describes someone that is fearful, scared, afraid. They're on pins and needles. Could you imagine sleeping at Marco's house for the weekend and he loses his snake? I would lose what hair I have left off of my head. Let's continue. His sister Pamela refused to enter the laundry room. So when someone refuses to do something, they deny, they will not do. I refuse to touch your dog, or I refuse to give you a bath. I'm not going to do it. Okay, negative, not going to happen. His sister Pamela refused to enter the laundry room, and their parents made Marco promise to find the snake quickly. Yes, I would want the snake found very quickly. Marco set up traps with his snake's favorite snacks. Now, ball pythons eat other animals like rats or mice. Pretty much, I remember my friend at the time, he would feed his python mice, and they would be alive, and they would run around the little cage, and the python would just go hunting and gobble them up, squeeze them to death and gobble them up. That was the life of the python and the mouse. So I could imagine that maybe Marco left some dead mice around that the snake could smell, and it would attract him, and then Marco could catch him. But Slinky seemed too sneaky to be caught. That's a tongue twister. But Slinky seemed too sneaky to be caught. So when someone is sneaky, they can move around undetected. Okay. Oftentimes we describe someone that is sneaky as being mischievous, or a slang term, we say they have a little creep in them. Okay. They like to creep around like a critter. Okay. So a creeping critter usually moves around and you don't hear it. So is someone that is sneaky. One evening, Marco heard a faint rustling noise while searching near the dryer. Okay. One evening, Marco heard a faint rustling noise. A faint. Now, remember, a person can lose consciousness and faint. So they would, they see the snake and just, that's faint. But when you say a small faint noise, okay, so using faint in that particular context has to do with something that you can barely detect or hear. And of course, a rustling noise is something moving around. So you might hear a rustling noise. Slinky would be moving around near the dryer. Now, why would a snake go near the dryer? Because snakes are warm-blooded creatures. They like to be where it is warm. And so I could understand that the python would go near the dryer, and hopefully he wouldn't burn, or it would be too hot for him. I guess it depends on the size of the snake. As he looked closer, he noticed Slinky's gleaming scales reflecting the light from a flashlight. As he looked closer, he noticed, or he saw, Slinky's gleaming scales reflecting the light from a flashlight. So something that is gleaming, shining. So the scales from the snake, as the flashlight hit it, it began to sparkle or shine, or we could use gleaming like in the sentence. Sometimes you might say, wow, the sun is gleaming bright today. Or wow, the car's light was gleaming directly into my eyes. Don't you hate when you're driving and the person coming near you in the opposite lane forgets to turn their bright lights off, or they have some very bright LED lights that shine so brightly in your face, it's gleaming, okay? Marco carefully reached behind the dryer and found Slinky curled up and perfectly calm. I wouldn't be perfectly calm. Not with a snake on the loose. Marco carefully reached behind the dryer and found Slinky curled up and perfectly calm. And that's one reason they call a ball python a ball, because they're known for curling up like the size of a ball. Sometimes if you see a python on someone's wrist, it will be balled around their wrist or their arm. I mean, very unique creatures. Would I have one for a pet? No. To everyone's relief, Marco carried Slinky back to his tank. Now, a tank, of course, is a military vehicle used to destroy opponents or enemies. But you can also house animals in a tank. So a small area, a box that has a top. Usually a tank, like a fish tank, is made of glass. Okay. So that's usually what people keep snakes in, so they can look through the tank and observe them throughout the day. Last sentence. The surprise. Slinky had been protecting a tiny lost kitten that had wandered into the house days earlier. No, Slinky was probably getting ready to eat. Getting ready to eat the kitten that had wandered into the house days earlier. Okay, let's get ready to read through today's story. And I want to tell you another quick story about a snake that I was told years ago. But let's read through today's story without stopping or any explanation. We're going to read at a faster pace, as I always do. Let's dive back in. Marco's pet ball python, Slinky, had been missing in the house for 3 days, and his family was in a state of panic. His sister Pamela refused to enter the laundry room, and their parents made Marco promise to find the snake quickly. Marco set up traps with his snake's favorite snacks, but Slinky seemed too sneaky to be caught. One evening, Marco heard a faint rustling noise while searching near the dryer. As he looked closer, he noticed Slinky's gleaming scales reflecting the light from a flashlight. Marco carefully reached behind the dryer and found Slinky curled up and perfectly calm. To everyone's relief, Marco carried Slinky back to his tank. The surprise? Slinky had been protecting a tiny lost kitten that had wandered into the house days earlier. That wasn't, maybe he was protecting the cat or the kitten because it was about to be his next snack. So I remember, before we get into today's quiz questions, I remember someone telling me a tale about a woman who had a pet snake, and she used to let the snake sleep with her. And for days, the snake would just hug up against her in the bed and be very still, wouldn't eat anything else. Weeks went by, same routine every day. The snake was sitting by the woman day in and day out and just looking at her, sleeping when she slept, and wouldn't eat anything. And so she was concerned. And after a few weeks, which turned into months, she went to a vet and asked the veterinarian, was the snake ill or what was going on? And so he asked, what was the routine? And she said, well, I would put the snake in the bed with me, and he would just sleep there, lay next to me, breathe naturally, but wouldn't eat anything else, but would just lay beside me. And weeks turned into months, and all this time, nothing. And so the vet said, well, when it comes to this particular snake, the snake was preparing to eat you. as it had to get its body prepared to digest you. So a snake will always be a snake. Okay, let's look at a few quiz questions. What does panic mean? I explained that in today's story. Number 2, what does gleaming mean? And number 3, what does rustling mean? All 3 of these I discussed in today's story. Let's see if you can remember, and leave me the answers down in the comments section. Well, that's going to do it for today's lesson. I hope you have enjoyed today's lesson as well as learned something. I think I'm going to make another video this week. If it does snow, hopefully I'm not too cold where I can go outside and film a lesson for you, maybe in the snow, or read a story in the snow. I don't know. We'll see. I would rather stay in the house by the fireplace because it is entirely too cold. Now, it doesn't get as cold here as it does in the northern part of the United States. You know, most people up north laugh at what we call cold here. So it's in the 20s now. But other parts of the country, it's actually in the negative. I couldn't do it. But nevertheless, I'm so glad that you watched today's lesson, and if you have enjoyed it and you know someone trying to improve their English, be sure to share today's lesson with them. And as always, I hope you join me on my next English lesson. I'll see you then.